It was the afternoon of November 22d, 10 days after the king's return to Paris, not yet 24 hours since Her Majesty's first salon at Versailles. The Abbé de Bernis, companionless, was proceeding slowly out of the grand entrance of the palace and down the broad avenue towards the first fountain. It was a raw day, grey and bleak, with a northeast Austrian wind, and an atmosphere resembling the relations between France and England. Nevertheless, the Abbé François was not walking hurriedly. If he were going into the town of Versailles, he was taking a circuitous route. The dress that he wore was decidedly non-clerical, being a rich costume of cramoisy satin, with very presentable Mechlin ruffles, and a heavily embroidered waistcoat. The wig was the only thing about him that proclaimed his calling, and even that, just now, was concealed by his hat and the high collar of the black cloak in which he was muffled. De Bernis was on his way to spend an hour or two with Madame de Coigny, whom of late he felt that he had neglected, and as he walked he reflected upon certain objective but important things. In the court circles, as they stood today, and as he carefully reviewed them, there were infinite possibilities for advancement. It was a time when no level-headed man could fail to take certain advantages of the present situation for the betterment of his position. For the first time in 10 years, the court was open. No favorite ruled the king, and, by consequence, the kingdom. And here the way was almost as clear for the ambitious among men as among women. For he who should be the one to bring to the notice of the King of France his next more than queen might, by his own unaided effort, obtain all the honor, glory, and left-handed, subtle power now divided among half a dozen ministers and courtiers. By the time de Bernis got so far in his meditations he had reached the Star, and was about to enter the Grand Park, with its love-named alleys, and the gloomy bosquets, so enticing in summer, now so grimly grey. The bare, black trees and shrubs, the frozen ground, the unshaded statues, poetic only when set in plumy foliage, hideous and indelicate now, all suddenly flashed over the Abbé's senses as being like the remains of a dead passion, stripped of all the softening graces and secret beauty lent by love when love is hot. The simile turned his mind again to the woman whom he was going to seek, Victorine, the little Victorine, whose whimsicalities had won his heart, but who was as tiresome as any other woman when she became to him devoted, submissive, content to obey, without even the desire to rouse jealousy in him. Was he tired of Victorine? Was her influence gone? Was she no longer of any use? De Bernis paused for an instant and thought. Of use? There was only one usage to which he could put a woman of Madame de Coigny's position. That was make, or at least attempt to make, her the greatest lady at court. Would Victorine de Coigny be capable of filling that place at his request? Had she influence enough in high places? Would she be fresh enough to His Majesty to please? Should he make the attempt? By the time the Abbé reached his temporary destination he had made shift to answer his not very creditable questions and come to a kind of hazy determination concerning his course. Madame de Coigny was at home and would receive him. He was shown directly from the antechamber to the little salon off her boudoir. Here he seated himself by the heavily curtained window, after throwing hat and cloak upon a chair beside the tall escritoire. Madame kept him waiting. He crossed his knees, and pulled from one of his pockets a little article wrapped in a feminine handkerchief. Returning the wrapper to the pocket, he sat idly examining what he held. It was a cross of golden filigree, apparently of Eastern workmanship, and set with red stones. The sun, at the moment, was near to breaking through the clouds, and he held the little thing up to watch the light play over the garnets, when the boudoir door opened and Victorine came quietly in. "What have you there, François?" He rose, looked approvingly at her toilet, and held out the cross. "I found this, by chance, 2 or 3 days ago among some old possessions of mine sent from Tours. Would you care for it? I offer it not as a symbol, you understand. Merely an ornament. It is not valuable." "Thank you. It is valuable to me. I will keep it always, like all of your gifts." He smiled slightly as she seated herself at a little distance from him. She was even paler than usual, and looked as though she might have been suffering physically. "You are not well today?" he asked, gently. "Oh yes, perfectly. I am never ill. I scarcely saw you last night. What did you think of the presentations? Is not Madame de Mailly lovely?" The abbé shrugged. "Very pretty. Parvenue, however. I prefer Madame d'Idioles, but you, before them all, Victorine." A smile broke over her face, and, for a moment, transfigured it. "Ah, François, that is as you were. Lately, sometimes, I had thought you changed towards me." He saw here an approaching opportunity for his difficult proposition. Rising, he drew another chair close to her, seated himself in it, and negligently took one of her hands into both of his. "Dear Victorine, I shall never change towards you," he said, in a low voice. "But there are some things which you do not quite consider." "What things? Tell me, François. Indeed, I will consider them. Only tell me all that is in your heart. I belong to you. You know that," she whispered. De Bernis moved uneasily. Tell what was in his heart. He was wiser than that, but his way was not easy. "You know, little one, that I am not a powerful man, not an influential one. Yet I am ambitious. I have but a small place to keep. There is a great one which I wish to win. A cardinal's hat, Victorine. That is my dream. You see, I am opening my heart to you. Ah, if I could make you a cardinal, if I could make you Pope, François. If I could make you the greatest man in the world." "You have made me the happiest," he answered, tenderly, touched a little by her unselfishness. "Then, if that is true, François, what more can you desire? The Beretta could do no more for you." "I am caught, my philosopher. And yet ambition does remain. I am not quite the happiest of men. I would wish to give you a higher place. I wish to be worthy of you. I would give you, for your slave, the most powerful man in France." "Ah," she said, smiling, "I could love him no better than I love you. My dear, if I were given my choice between you and the King of France, do you not know which I should choose?" He bent over her quickly. "Which would you choose?" "How can you ask? You do not doubt me?" "Nay, but, Victorine, if, by being favored of the court of the king, you could further your own interests, if you could further mine, if I asked it of you." He broke off suddenly. Her face was changing. "What do you mean?" she demanded, and there was something in the tone which made him thankful that he had gone no further. She breathed convulsively, but went on in a lighter manner, "Are you testing me? Are you trying to learn my nature, how far I would sink? Ah, François, you, who have given me such joy, the only happiness that I have known, have given me also my greatest sorrow. Do not think, because I renounced everything for you, that I am like the women of the court. I love you, you always, more dearly than honor. But, François, it was only for love. I am proud that you had no position to give me. I swear to you, by what I still hold sacred, that if the post won by Madame de Châteauroux were offered me by His Majesty, on his knees, I would prefer to die than to accept such a thing." She passed her hand over her forehead, and lay back again in her chair, smiling a little at his earnest frown. "I do not censure Madame de Châteauroux, François, you understand. She loved the king as I love you." The actual veracity of this last statement was an immaterial thing. It was Victorine's belief in it that did her honor. François did not remark upon it, neither did he voice any further confessions of ambition. Madame de Coigny was singularly blind to her interests and his. She was not the type of woman that belonged to a court. True, had her position been rather more influential, no man need have desired better things than would have fallen to the lot of the sagacious abbé. But, being only the wife of a Marquis Field Marshal, and too single-hearted for wisdom, she was a luxury undesirable for a rising man. For an instant de Bernis' thoughts were directed to the husband. After all, his position as one of the favored courtiers, and one really esteemed, would have been difficult to overcome in order that Madame might be installed alone in the palace. It was as well, perhaps, that her trend of mind was such as he had discovered it to be. It was also as well that, in the midst of the reflective pause, the antechamber door should unexpectedly have opened, and M. de Coigny himself have entered the room. "Ah! Pardon me, madam. I was unaware that you were engaged." Victorine rose quickly, looked at her husband, saw his eyes meet those of the abbé, and remained silent. De Coigny was about to turn upon his heel and leave them, to her great relief, when François spoke. "I beg, monsieur, that you will not let me deprive you of Madame's society. I am just on the way to Paris, and was taking my leave as you came." He finished, quite heedless of Victorine's imploring glance, which, however, de Coigny caught. "If you are going to the city, you must first have something, a glass of wine." "Yes, yes. It will not be long. I will order at once." In spite of de Bernis' earnest protestation, Victorine summoned the valet and ordered wine and rissoles for all three. "You will, then, allow me to partake with you?" asked the Marechal, with a quizzical scrutiny of his wife, who merely nodded, saying, dully, "We are delighted, monsieur." De Bernis was displeased. It was never agreeable to him to face Jules de Coigny, and he would have been glad to escape at once after that destructive silence of Victorine's. He had all his ideas to readjust, a fresh plan to make, and a verse or two to compose for extemporaneous use during the evening. However, he made better show of being at ease for the next quarter of an hour than did Madame, and he managed to carry on a very creditable conversation about the Vauvenargues salon while sipping his wine and crumbling the pâté. He took his departure, without undue haste, at just the right moment, kissed Madame's hand with ceremony, and bowed himself away from the Marechal, feeling that he should not often see that small salon again. It would not be wise. When the abbé was gone, and Jules and his wife were left alone together, Victorine looked uneasily about her, hoping for a means of escape. "I must ask your pardon, madam, once more, for having been so stupid as to have intruded upon you. Jerome did not inform me." "It is of no consequence, monsieur. As you heard, the abbé was on the point of departure. Did you, by some chance, wish to speak with me?" "The matter was not of great importance. However, I thought that it might please you to learn that Madame de Châteauroux is likely soon to be reinstated. This afternoon His Majesty was good enough to talk with me freely in tête-à-tête. He misses the Duchess very much. He is preparing, quietly, to place her at her post again. She is your friend. I thought that it might give you pleasure to know. Of course, what I have told must not be repeated." "Thank you, Jules. I am very glad. Marie has been my good friend always." "It was she, I believe, who presented to you M. de Bernis." "Yes," replied Victorine, looking up at him in surprise. There was a pause. De Coigny should have been making his departure. Yet still he stood there, as awkwardly as possible, half turned from his wife, who sat regarding him in some astonishment, and without the desire to say a word. The Marshal's head drooped a little. He put one hand to his forehead, and seemed to be going through an inward struggle. Several moments passed. Madame moved restlessly. Finally she said, "What is it, Jules? What have you further to say to me?" Coiny shook his head and passed his hand over his eyes. "It is immaterial, Victorine. I have already said it once. I will not repeat myself. It is immaterial, I say. Good afternoon."